let's talk about validation. What is validation? Why do we seek validation out? Why is it important? And why may it be getting in the way of the healing that we want? And if you're a therapist or a coach, a space holder, let's also talk about validation as a tool in the work. How may it be useful and where may it be a hindrance to the work? Let's get into it. Hi, I'm Thaís Sky. I'm a licensed psychotherapist and your host here on Reclaim, a podcast that brings nuance to popular psychology and offers help beyond self-help. After a decade in the wellness world as a yoga teacher and an embodiment somatic coach, I became disillusioned with the approaches that keep people on the kind of self-improvement treadmill without addressing the deeper patterns that are getting in our own way. And that's what led me to go back to school to get my master's in clinical psych. It's what propelled me to study psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic psychotherapy, because I've become very interested in how do we create the types of change that we want to experience internally and in our lives, because real lasting changes require more than behavioral and mindset shifts. So if you're a tender-hearted human craving substance, complexity, and a more honest look at the human experience, you're in the right place. I'm so happy you're here. Let's get into today's topic. The reason why I've been called to have this conversation, this podcast episode on validation, is because I've been seeing a lot of references online and in my therapy office around this idea of my therapist tells me I'm right and I want to be challenged. I've had many people say to me, I want you to be direct with me. I want you to be honest with me. I'm tired of just getting validation. It's not changing me, and I want to know what's really going on for me. I also see memes online, right, of my therapist validated my narcissistic partner, like the ways in which we feel like therapy or therapists are only here to make one feel good. And that is a massive misunderstanding of what therapy is. But I think we're speaking, there's something going on culturally in the self-help improvement landscape where we're starting to, I think, really grapple with validation in a different way. And so it's been making me think a lot about this, about validation and the role that it plays in our healing. And in this episode, I kind of want to talk more about it, why we seek it, why it's important, when it can be harmful or it can be a hindrance to the kind of growth we're wanting to experience, and how to use it as a tool in the therapeutic encounter. And so, of course, we have to start by talking about what is validation. When I Googled it and did some research of what is validation, I appreciated this definition, that it's a recognition or affirmation that a person or their feelings or opinions are valid or worthwhile. Now, of course, the minute I see worthwhile, I start thinking about the worthiness wound. And I definitely think that wanting validation and this idea of validation is intertwined for many of us around the worthiness wound and feeling worthwhile, feeling significant, feeling good enough. Psychoanalytically, we can think of validation as a form of psychic recognition. It's the experience of having one's internal world registered and reflected back by another mind without distortion or erasure. There's a couple things that are really important to think about. That validation requires another mind, someone else outside of us, hearing what we're saying, hearing our thoughts, our feelings, and reflecting it back and saying in some sort of way, I get that this is how it feels for you, right? It's a form of attunement. It's a way that we're appreciating the other person's mind and we're naming that we get it. There's an empathy there. There's a sense of I can step into your world. I can be in your shoes and I can appreciate what you're experiencing. And of course, in the beginning of therapy, in the beginning of a new relationship with a new friend, with a new colleague, with a new partner, validation can be so incredibly helpful. The sense of I get it can feel like an important first step in then being able to question ourselves a little bit more deeply. It's a starting point of connection. It's a way that we're assessing that another person outside of us, right, another mind, has the flexibility to be able to step into our world. And that flexibility can make us feel more safe, more secure within ourselves, but most importantly, within the relationship. especially if it's a relationship where there's some vulnerability, there's some sharing of oneself, to know that somebody else can appreciate our vulnerability and can reflect to us, hey, if I were in your shoes, I would feel similarly. It can feel incredibly securing. It can feel incredibly touching. So when we're thinking about like, oh, why is validation so important? I want us to remember that part of what is happening, part of the mechanism of validation, is that the other person is able to step into our world, and that bridge can then feel like a way for us to feel more open with that person. It can feel like it sets the stage for something meaningful to occur within the relationship. And so, validation is essentially a way of saying, yes, that's right. Of course, that's right. Yes. It's not just about being agreed with, though. Let me be clear. It's not just by saying you're valid. It's not just by like affirming like, yes, you are right. No notes. It's more than that. It's a way of being seen, of being recognized in the struggle, in the pain, in the conflict that we're having. And of course, a kind of a real validation, not a kind of shallow or cheap validation, often involves kind of an attunement or a reflection of the emotional experience. It's not just saying like, your opinion is right because you're always right. Everything you do is right? But it's rather this kind of reflective function of touching the emotions underneath it. Winnicott, who's a well-known psychoanalyst, he thought about this as like a mirror function of the mother, how the infant sees themselves in the caregiver's gaze, right? So it's this idea that who we are is built out of our caregiver's ability to reflect to us who we are. Our mind is built first and foremost through the mind of another, which is terrifying in some ways if we think about how fragile a baby's mind is, child's mind, as they're learning about themselves. Having a caregiver, having an adult, having someone out there say to the child, you're crying because, or oh my goodness, you are crying, right? This kind of function of reflecting back to the baby, this is what's happening, is a way that the baby starts to learn, oh, this is what's happening. That is a form of validation, that type of attunement of saying, of course you're crying, you're hungry, that makes sense. Right? There's another analyst, Bion, and he talked about it as a containment of unprocessed states, and that validation is like a soft form of emotional containment. When we are feeling so distressed, it can feel so all-encompassing, again, especially as a baby who this is their first experience of distress. And so having an other who can take all that unprocessed, unmetabolized affect and emotion and be able to give it back to the baby in a more metabolized way is a really important function for the baby. So baby is crying. It doesn't know why it's crying. It doesn't know what's going on. It just knows that it's distressed. The mother looks at the baby and says, well, of course you're crying. You're hungry. Let me give you food. The baby starts to realize, oh, this kind of unmetabolized distress is actually something very specific. And we start to learn what that is. So some key features, right, of a real kind of meaningful, useful validation is that it's a recognition of inner experience. It's an attunement to the affect, the emotional experience. It's a staying with the experience rather than a fixing and moving away and advice giving. And it's not intrusive. You're not kind of being overridden or hijacked. It's not, oh yeah, that makes sense that you feel this way, but also like, oh my God, you feel that way, right? You're not being kind of impinged on by the other person's emotional experience of your story. So these are all kind of, I think, important things to think about when we're seeking validation and maybe it's not hitting or maybe it's not feeling very good, even though the person is saying all the right things. Maybe we can look at it as like, maybe it's just it's not hitting because it's not a real kind of attuned validation. People are saying the right things, but it's not coming out of a real heart experience. Sometimes that happens, right, when we're in a conflict with our partner and we're just wanting our partner to understand our perspective, and then our partner just mimics us or regurgitates what we're saying, right? They're like, no, I get what you're saying, and they repeat verbatim what we are saying to them, but it doesn't feel like they're really getting it. It feels like they're just regurgitating. That's a great example of like, it's not a real validation. But in the conflict, in the fight, the partner may be feeling, but I'm doing it, I'm listening, look, I'm repeating verbatim what you're saying, but we're not feeling like they're really getting it, like we're really seen. Knowing that that may not be an actual real form of validation can help us feel a little less crazy in those moments. It's not just about being repeated back, right? It's about a kind of mental flexibility of the other. Again, it's a starting point of connection, but it's a very important starting point. And I cannot express it enough that validation has a role, and a very important role, in how we relate to people. If I were smarter or wittier, I think I would be able to come up with like 2 different categories of validation that then we could differentiate between like, what is this real validation or is this cheap validation? Well, there you go. I guess we can name it as real and cheap. It's not fun. It's not as good. I feel like somebody else would have like a really more catchy words, but I'm being hard on myself. So we'll break it down that way. But first, I think it's important to kind of talk about like why we yearn for it in the first place. Like, why do we need validation in the first place? Like, what is going on there? I think those of us who are very sensitive to feeling gaslit or very sensitive to the worthiness wound and feeling insignificant, bad, worthwhile, there's a way in which we actually have an embodied experience. We know why validation is so important, because we were probably ones that didn't receive the type of validation we really needed. It can create then a real kind of shaky internal world where we're never really sure what we're feeling and why it's important and why it's meaningful. And so, it's easy to assume that wanting validation just means that we want to feel right or liked or supported. And we can get very dismissive of that in some ways when inside ourselves. And sure, in some ways, sometimes it can be about that, right? But if we go a bit deeper, we start to see that the need for validation actually touches something a lot more primal, a lot more primitive, a lot younger. And in psychoanalytic theory, right, especially in object relations and attachment literature, we learn that our sense of self forms in relationship to how others respond to us. And so it's through being seen, mirrored, and held that we start to feel real to ourselves. When someone says, I want to feel validated, what they're often saying is, consciously or not, I need you to confirm that what I am feeling is real, that my experience makes sense, and that I'm not crazy or bad or too much for feeling this way. And for many of us, if we grew up in an inconsistent or misattuned household with caregivers who weren't able to offer this reflective function for us, then there were moments when we did have feelings, big, confusing, overwhelming feelings, and yet no one was there to make sense of it for us, right? No one said, yes, that is scary. That makes sense that you feel that way. I see how much that hurt. And so then those internal states, that fear, the rage, the grief, they were either denied or dismissed or met with confusion. And when that happens over and over again in early life, something crucial doesn't develop. A felt sense of coherence, a sense of self, a sense that what's happening inside of us can actually be known, it can be named, it can be survived. And so fast forward to adulthood, we may now find ourselves pulling for validation all the time, not because we're weak, not because we're needy or because we're kind of attention seeking, but because we're trying to repair something, right? We're trying to, in some ways, stitch together, bring back together parts of ourselves that got fragmented in those early relational failures. And of course, when that longing for validation goes unmet again and again, especially in adulthood, it can then feel really, really annihilating. We might spiral, we may ruminate, we may shut down, we may enter kind of a rage, because it's not just about that moment of not getting the validation, but it's about this kind of old experience that's getting replayed in the moment, right? There's an activation of something old that's happening in those moments. It's not, well, my partner doesn't validate me. I didn't get the validation I needed when I was younger. So when we seek validation, we're often not just looking for comfort, we're looking for a type of existential relief, right? Am I real? Am I allowed to feel this way? Can someone else survive my internal world so that I can too? And this is all an argument for why validation matters. It's not just a social courtesy. It's a psychic need to know internally, I can feel something, I can survive it, and it's valid even if no one else says so. But that is why we yearn for it now if we didn't get it then. We're trying to make up for something. And so even though on the one hand, validation now can feel very good and we can seek it and we can want it, there may also be ways in which we yearn for it and it never feels like enough. And no matter how many times we ask our friends for advice, for example, which is a cheap form of validation, we're seeking this cheap form, hoping it's going to do the work of this more substantial form of validation. But we may not even know, right, that we're seeking something deeper. We're trying to get it in this kind of cheap way. And then it feels like junk food. We keep feeding ourselves with it. Our friends keep indulging us. We keep being told what to do. And yet it doesn't fill the kind of ache of not feeling like our feelings could ever have really been metabolized and made sense of. And so if you're feeling like, oh, there's something really wrong with me because no matter how much I try to get it, either the cheap or the real, it doesn't fill, well, we need to maybe think about what could be happening there developmentally for you. What could have been happening in your childhood that is kind of leading you now to feel like it's not enough in this moment. And it's in part because, and this is something that we grapple with in therapies in so many different ways, is that we can try to fill the hole from our childhood. And there's all sorts of ways that we can fill it with dirt. We can try to, but there's also ways in which we really can't undo the past, that the damage of the past is always there because we can't undo it, because we can't go back. So we can change and we can adjust and we can make space for it now in a different way. But we really can't ever fill the hole that was made in the past. So there's an invitation then to do some work of grieving the fact that we didn't get something that we really needed in the past. And now it leaves this kind of ache that feels like it can't ever really be filled. And so what I think is happening is that on some level, we're wanting a really substantial type of validation. We're wanting to get something we never got. We're yearning for something much more substantial, much deeper. But we don't know any of this. This may all be unconscious. We may never have had language for this. No one really told us this. So we seek validation in its much more commodified form, in a much more kind of available form. We ask people to tell us what to do. We post on social media, right? There's so much validation that we can get in some ways on social media. There's ways in which we seek out communities of like-minded people. We seek out information that's going to validate our point of view. And of course, because of the age of the internet, we will always find someone else that's going to share our point of view. And so we seek out these kind of cheaper forms of validation that is just rampant everywhere. And we do it because we've forgotten what validation really means. And so now we're kind of creating a culture where we are expecting this cheap form of validation constantly to try to make up for the fact that we're not actually getting something substantive over here. This happens a lot in our coupling, where we're kind of constantly asking our partner to validate us, to tell us that we're right, to tell us that they love us, to tell us to, we're seeking it. We're seeking this reassurance. We're seeking tell me. And it's hard because then we hear it from our partner, we hear it from the online world, we hear it from our friends, yes, you should, he is crazy, you should feel this way, you should be having all these big feelings, and yet, again, it's not really hitting it, it's not really doing what we want it to do, and it's hard because if it's accessible, this way of getting validation, we can start to feel then if we don't even get this, then something very dangerous is going to happen, right? This form of validation, this cheap form, is so available that now we're kind of expecting it everywhere. And if anyone were to disagree with us, if anyone were to say, no, I don't agree, or I don't believe it, or I don't know that what you're feeling is making sense, or I don't have advice for you, or whatever it is, we can then quickly get disoriented and move towards you're gaslighting me. And I have a whole podcast episode on gaslighting that I invite you to listen to, because I think this topic and validation, gaslighting go really hand in hand, because the underlying fear is my reality valid? Is my reality real? And if we're sensitive to feeling gaslit, if we're sensitive to feeling like if someone doesn't agree with us, then our reality isn't real, then it makes a lot of sense that we're also then going to kind of consistently seek out validation and seek out people who are going to affirm how we see things. The tricky thing about seeking validation from the internet specifically is that what we're really looking for when we're looking for validation is a relational experience, right? This deep thing over here, a real validation. And the internet can't really ever provide that. And we see it in people who are constantly seeking validation on the internet. They're constantly posting things to try to get some type of affirmation that they look good, that they are good, that everything is okay. And we can see how it's never enough. The numbers will always change. The amount of followers you need will always increase. It will never feel enough because, again, it's not ever meant to. The only way that it will be enough is if we really grapple with what we're really yearning for when we're seeking validation and find ways to get it in a very real way. See how seeking validation cheaply rather than doing the work of creating an environment, creating the type of relationships where real validation can occur, which we're going to talk about what that means in a minute, is a way that maybe we express ambivalence about validation. Because the tricky thing about seeking something now that we never really got then is that it can also feel like getting that thing now is dangerous. It's the irony for so many of us. We want, for example, a secure relationship, but because we've never experienced secure relationships, we actually don't even know that it is a secure relationship, and that security may feel then unsafe, or it may feel dangerous, or it may feel boring. And so ambivalence around validation is very understandable if we haven't really gotten it in our past. Right? So now getting it, we both want it, we're seeking it, we're trying to get it in all sorts of ways. But then when we do get the kind of meaningful, deep validation, it can feel like that's not it, that's not enough, because it's not hitting, it's not getting that kind of the snazzy feeling that we think it would give us. Because again, we're trying to address a feeling that may feel very foreign to us. And so part of the work for those of us who yearn for validation and feel like we've never really gotten it and kind of are struggling with it now is to actually expand our capacity to tolerate a meaningful form of validation. Without brushing it away, without dismissing it, without cheapening it, without destroying it. Well, you have to say that. How often do we say that to our partners, right? Our partners can look at us in the eye and say, "You are gorgeous." And we immediately go towards, "You have to say that." You don't actually believe that. And it's like, why would they say that if they didn't mean it? And what a form of intimacy that is when someone can look into your eyes and say that you're beautiful. But it can feel so terrifying to receive that type of validation that we dismiss it. And that's the tricky thing about validation, is that you have to you can ask for it, but you also have to work on receiving it. And receiving it can be very, very terrifying. It forces us to confront all sorts of things about what we didn't get and what we're now getting. And it doesn't feel quite what we thought it was going to feel like, and our fantasies of what it would feel like. It forces us to grieve what we didn't get. It can feel so good now when we receive something that we never got. And it can feel so good that it puts us in touch with like, oh, so I could have gotten it then and I didn't. And how devastating that is. This is very kind of complicated and intimate work. Something I want to note, on this idea of cheap validation, I think, is that in many healing spaces online, we've rightfully emphasized how crucial validation is, right? Especially for survivors of trauma. Feeling seen, understood, and mirrored can be deeply reparative. But as trauma discourse has really entered the mainstream, it's sometimes flattened into this idea that if someone doesn't validate me, they're invalidating me, they're gaslighting me, therefore they are unsafe, right? This kind of black and white thinking loses sight of complexity of the relationship and all the kind of possible reasons why someone may not be meeting us exactly the way we want. And so in that way, validation has often become a demand, not a desire, where people start to require validation in order to feel regulated, which is tricky because when we outsource our emotional regulation or self-worth to others, especially especially in personal relationships, it can set up a really unsustainable dynamic, right? It can look like if you don't validate me, you're abusive. If you're not agreeing with my perspective, you're re-traumatizing me. If you don't mirror my emotional state, you're gaslighting me. And we talk more about this in the gaslighting episode, but this can lead to a kind of weaponization of vulnerability where the person seeking validation is positioned as inherently correct or morally superior because they're the wounded one. And any failure to respond in the right way is framed as a psychological violence. We want to be really thoughtful of where this may be taking place. And this leads me into kind of a really important aspect of what true validation can offer and can mean. In order for a relationship to be set up in such a way that true validation can occur, the type of validation that feels like a real mental flexibility, right, that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, a type of validation that feels like it really touches on an empathic, emotional experience. In order for that to occur, an important aspect of the relationship that must exist is that the other person has the space to communicate, to experience difference and choice. Okay, so if we are in a relationship where we demand that our partner validate us and we're not leaving them any other choice to invalidate us or to not agree with us, if we're setting up a relational dynamic where disagreement cannot exist without it being unsafe or violent, abusive, dangerous in some way, right? If we're setting up this relationship where any difference is not tolerated, then true validation can never occur, because true validation is not about mimicking the words. It's not about saying, yes, you're right all the time. It's about taking a subjectivity that is different from yours and then doing this kind of exercise of bridging to your subjectivity. And vice versa, of course. True validation, the conditions of a relationship where true validation can occur is that both individuals can feel like they can disagree. They may not disagree, but that they can disagree and that can be tolerated in the relationship. If that does not exist in the relationship, true validation can never occur. Does that make sense? Think about it. If you are kind of coercing our partner to validate us by saying, if you don't agree, then you are bad in some way, then how is their agreement ever going to feel genuine or real? It's not. We know that we're doing this, even if it's all happening unconsciously. If I tell you that your favorite ice cream has to be chocolate in order for this relationship to work, and then the next sentence I ask you, what's your favorite ice cream? You're not going to feel comfortable saying that it's not chocolate, right? So you're going to say chocolate. And then it's like, well, is that true? Is it really chocolate or is it not chocolate? I now don't know, because I set up the conditions of this relationship for you to not really be able to express your opinion. So the irony, the difficulty, the kind of struggle of creating conditions in a relationship where true validation, true attunement, true empathy, true compassion, true love can exist is one in which difference is allowed, is tolerated, is encouraged. Difference meaning difference of opinion, difference of feelings, that we can be two separate individuals coming together. And that's really tricky, because for those of us who struggle with not feeling validated, not feeling secure, not feeling safe, one of the ways that we seek out safety is through sameness. If we are the same mind, then this relationship can't be dangerous, right? If we think alike, if we have the same preferences, if we believe in the same things, if there are no differences here, if we're the same person, you can't be dangerous to me. But this is a fallacy. It's a fantasy, because another individual can't ever be the same as you. Another person's mind can never be the same as your mind. And validation, true validation, a type of attunement that we're seeking when we're seeking validation, does not come out of sameness. It comes out of the ability to tolerate difference. So if you are someone who really struggles with validation, really struggles with wanting it and yearning for it and seeking reassurance and constantly seeking to know how people think of you in order to feel safe and in order to feel secure. Part of the work for you, part of what I imagine may be for some of you, I can't speak for all of you, but maybe for some of you, the invitation is to work on expanding our capacity to receive real validation, and also our capacity to tolerate difference in relationship without destroying our inherent goodness. And this touches on the other side of this question or this equation, which is that some of us, ironically, are wanting validation desperately, seeking it out constantly. We may also have a really hard time validating others. How often has this happened in a conflict, in a fight, where your partner is asking you to understand their point of view? Can you see it? Can you understand? And we feel like you are objectively wrong. I am objectively right. And therefore, if I validate you, if I tell you that your perspective, your experience is understandable, then what I am doing is I am agreeing that your perspective is the right one, and that's wrong, right? Because my perspective is the right one. And so if I make space in my mind for your experience, I am then devaluing my experience in my own mind. And that's frightening. That's terrifying, because I've worked so hard to try to have even some sort of semblance of an okay with my experience. And so then we get really caught up in these conflicts where we can't really give anything to our partners. We can't really give in. We can't really be flexible in our minds to make space for their experience. And that sets up a really tricky dynamic, because no relationship can really thrive if we are not creating some type of mental flexibility inside of ourselves to make space for our partner's subjectivity, for our partner's difference. So if we have a really hard time validating others, it may be because we are really frightened of creating that flexibility in our minds, because we're afraid that we're going to lose something of ourselves. Holding two emotional realities at once is taxing. It requires a whole lot of ego strength, the ability to be strong in our minds to make space for another. And what does it do then? So when we are having a hard time validating others, it's probably because it's stirring up so many of our own feelings, right? Maybe the other person's expressing something painful, shameful, or it stirs up like unresolved feelings in us. We can start to feel like, oh my God, if I really accept what this other person is saying, that I hurt them, then does that mean that I'm a bad person? Does that mean that there's something really wrong with me, right? And so we try to defend against that shame of that by like not wanting to listen to our partner's perspective. We may also get confused with this idea that validation is agreement. Agreement is in many ways, I think, falls under the category of cheap validation, because to agree is actually, again, coming out of this place of sameness. Sometimes validation is because the other person agrees. Sometimes validation comes because they don't agree, but they can understand. Again, that kind of mental flexibility. And so we can be afraid that if we validate our partner, validate our friends' feelings, even if we don't agree, that we are saying you're right about the facts. But that's not real meaningful validation, right? Meaningful validation is about acknowledging their emotional experience. And it is really remarkable when in a conflict, when we can make mental flexibility to say, you know what? I don't agree with it, but I can really see why you would feel that way. I didn't mean to hurt you, but I can see how my comment hurt you. It's incredible how much that can then open the relationship up for then the other person to also be like, you know what? Yeah, same. You know, I can also see how what I said hurt you. And it's not about who's right and who's wrong. We've heard this adage, right? That like you can either be right or be married, right? Being right, being wrong, these are not important metrics of success in a marriage, in a relationship, in any partnership, any friendship. It's not about who's right. It's about, can we understand something of what the other person is saying without losing ourselves in the process? Because that's dangerous too, to completely lose ourselves. Be like, oh, you are right. I'm wrong. I'm always wrong. You're right. Who am I to have feelings? That's not it either. That's still kind of devolving into a type of sameness to try to avoid the tension that comes with difference. But that tension that is so critical for sexual vitality to be alive in a relationship, for chemistry, for joy, aliveness, those all require difference in a relationship. So the other thing, of course, that can be hard about why it can be hard to validate others is because it does require us to be able to tolerate the other person being in pain without fixing it. Fixing is a cheap form of validation, right? Oh, here, let's give this advice. Let's tell you what to do so you can resolve this pain. It doesn't feed really the more substantive desire that we have to be understood when we are being fixed. But when someone that we love is coming to us with a lot of pain, it can feel very seductive for us to try to fix the pain. And it's so much of what we've been conditioned to do, is to respond to distress by offering solutions, or like to get reassurance of some kind instead of being with the vulnerability of like the acknowledgement of the pain. So, we want to be really thoughtful about, okay, somebody's having really big feelings. They're bringing it to me. What is it hard to bear for me about those person's feelings? And that may be partly why it's so hard to validate them and to be able to create our own mental flexibility to reach them. But again, really thriving relationships require mental flexibility and being able to step into the other person's subjectivity. And again, I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but that requires being able to tolerate difference. One of the things that I want to make sure that I'm commenting on is that wanting validation from people is not a sign that there's something wrong or broken with you. I know that there's a lot of self-help mantras out there about not needing validation, that a secure person doesn't need validation from other people. But I hope that I've built this argument enough that actually real validation, true validation, is actually a really meaningful way of connecting with people. It's the self-affirming, the sense of feeling like we are allowed to experience our feelings, or that somebody else can be in our feelings with us, is actually a really important ongoing need that we have as humans. It's not a sign that you're needy, like I said before. It's not a sign that you're too much because you want validation. Some of us want it more than others. Some of us crave it and yearn it out of a more childhood wounding, and those are important things to know about yourself. But validation in general is an important human need. We are allowed to want it. We are allowed to need it, right? We are allowed to seek it. I know sometimes I've seen people talk about it as a form of codependency. I don't agree. I think we will always need each other. Relationships require an interdependency, and that includes depending on people. Wanting validation, especially the meaningful form of validation, can be a really wonderful foundational and first kind of step in meaningful relating. And so validation itself is not the problem, yeah? However, when we seek validation and we don't get validation, or if we're seeking it from somebody, there are some questions that we can ask ourselves to get a sense of like, what's going on here for us? Are we trying to are we seeking cheap validation? Are we seeking a form of connection with our partner? Like, what's going on here? And there's some questions that you can ask yourself if you're finding yourself seeking reassurance or validation that can maybe give you some insight into maybe a little bit more of what's happening for you. One of them is, why this person and why now? Why are you seeking this form of validation from this person now? What is that? Why this particular person? And why this particular moment? Is it coming out of feeling very fragile? Or did you just have a really tough day and you're kind of just wanting to feel okay? And you're kind of asking your partner to do that function for you. Like, what's going on here? What is the setup that is leading you, wanting, you to seek validation, to seek reassurance? Are you wanting reassurance? Are you wanting to feel filled because there's a deficit here? Or are you wanting to erase your insecurity? Are you wanting something to go away? And that answer could maybe help you understand a little bit more of yourself in these moments where you're seeking validation. And then another question that, so what else could I be wanting here? Am I wanting advice, or am I wanting to feel like I'm being kept in mind by this person? Am I wanting to be told that I'm okay, or am I wanting to feel connected to this person? And this is the way that I've learned how to connect with people. This is a very common form of connecting for so many of us, is to seek validation. It's a way of saying, hey, are you there? Hey, are you there? Tell me you love me, And while in some ways and in some levels, it's totally fine to seek validation in this, or seek connection in this way. In other ways, it may be that it doesn't actually get you the connection that you want. And maybe if you know this about yourself and know that this is how you get connection and this is how you seek out connection, then we can think about what other ways could you seek out connection. Maybe it's less about, hey, do you love me? And more about, hey, let's play together. Hey, let's spend some quality time together. Let's just be together. Let's be present together. And we're seeking that out by saying, hey, do you love me? But our partner's playing video games and say, yeah, I love you, babe. And it's like, it doesn't hit, right? It doesn't feel right. Maybe it's because we're thinking that we want to hear these words, but we're actually wanting a type of presence. I want to connect. We want something more meaningful, a deeper form of validation. And so how can we set ourselves up and set up the partnership to get more of this thing that we want, rather than kind of be sucked into this, say you love me, say that you care about me. And again, if we're doing it that way, also we're not creating the conditions necessary for there to be difference, and therefore whatever we hear, it's not going to really fill the void that we're wanting it to fill. Okay, I'm looking at my notes here. Okay, so yes, okay, we can understand that validation is important and a meaningful way of connecting with people, and that's a good first step. We can know this, but maybe you're also wondering, okay, but I don't know, I'm starting to feel like I'm overly reliant on validation. And there are some dangers of that, right? So it can reinforce a fragile sense of self, right? When someone is overly dependent on external validations to know who they are or what they feel, right? It kind of suggests an internal structure of self that has not been fully solidified, right? So this often is rooted in the early relational experiences where one's emotional reality was not mirrored, was not met. And so rather than developing kind of an internal compass or sense of solidity, the person constantly looks outside of themselves to be told, am I okay? Is this feeling real? Do I make sense? Yeah. So, but by doing that, the ego, the sense of self remains fragile. And so and that means that it can be easily disrupted by misattunement or disagreement, right? Or a lack of affirmation. So yeah, one of the dangers is that it keeps us in a perpetual state of fragility. It can also be very addictive, which is, I think, what we see a lot on social media, and like this kind of sense of like, I'm tired of getting affirmed all the time, right? It's funny to see the conversation about ChatGPT, and it's like, ChatGPT is too affirming. And there's ways in which it feels really good when you type in an idea, and ChatGPT is like, that is a brilliant idea. Wow. Good job. It can feel good, but at the same time, it's like, but there's a sense of like, are you being honest with me, or are you just telling me what you think I want to hear? And again, now we know, now we have an understanding of what could be going on there. Maybe we haven't set up the conditions in the relationship for real honesty. And if we haven't, because we can't tolerate honesty, then any validation is not going to really feel honest. Yeah, it's not going to feel authentic and genuine, because authenticity and genuine kind of relating requires being able to be honest. Yes. So it can be addicting, and it can be a way that we're kind of constantly seeking out mirrors rather than doing the kind of intrapsychic work, because validation feels good. Getting those likes on Instagram can feel so good. Getting comments, hearing how nice the podcast lands for you. It's good. It's like a narcissistic supply, right? It supplies my ego. It makes me feel good. I love it. It makes me feel like I'm not just throwing this episode into the void. Like, I love hearing from all of you. And of course, I love hearing how much you like the podcast. Of course, it feels good. And it gives the illusion of being known. But of course, anything that is cheap can also be very easily taken away. And it can put a lot of pressure on having to perform in order to get this kind of cheap thing. And of course, it can feed into even more anxiety, because then it becomes less about like me sharing, let's say, a genuine topic that I'm interested in. It becomes more about like, how can I get more likes? And so it moves away from an authentic center. Okay, let's see. What other challenges of getting kind of being overly dependent, quote unquote, on validation? It can serve as a defense against challenge or insight. Yes. we seek validation not because we don't really want clarity or growth, right? But because we want protection from discomfort. And then we can feel like, oh, you're not validating me, you're attacking me. If you're not on my side, you're against me, right? And this kind of bypasses the opportunity for discomfort, which is a really inherent part of growth. And it keeps people in a position of needing to be constantly affirmed, right? Putting us in a down position where we're constantly seeking people up position to affirm us rather than metabolizing our own internal conflicts. Right? Because emotional maturity involves the capacity to hold the inner tension, like we've been saying. Like I can hold two contradictory things at once. I can want something and also feel ashamed about wanting it. I can tolerate ambivalence, uncertainty, and doubt. And over-reliance on validation can undermine this process because instead of metabolizing our internal guilt and working through the guilt, the envy, the shame, right, the longing, the person looks outward to be told what to do and to feel reassured out of their discomfort, And so over time, this keeps us stuck. And this leads me into what happens when you don't get validation. This is a good opportunity for you to learn something about yourself. Like what happens when you ask your partner, do I look good in this dress? And our partner says, I don't really like the dress. What happens there for you? There's a couple options that can happen in that scenario, right? We can get mad at them. How could you not like me in this dress? That is incorrect. You were only supposed to give me one comment and it's that you like this dress. I'm mad at you and now I'm not going out to dinner with you, right? We can move into, all right, you don't like the dress. What don't you like about the dress? Is it the shape? Is it the cut? Is it the color? Maybe I need a different belt. Maybe a different purse. Maybe that will make this whole thing together. Like I really trust your input and I am interested to hear like why you don't like it and maybe I can work with that. Or can it be like, all right, you don't like the dress, but I love this dress. I love how this looks. So we're just going to have to be in our difference about it. And that's okay that you don't like it because I really like it, right? We could do that. But we can also do like the, fuck you. Like, I don't care that you don't like the dress. It can be a defensive thing of like, I don't care, actually, never mind. I don't care what you think. Don't ever tell me what you think, right? So there's all sorts of different scenarios of how we can respond to that. And that tells us so much about how we have the ability to tolerate difference and somebody else not agreeing with us. Do we collapse internally? Do we go, well, this dress is hideous. I'm terrible. How could I possibly have chosen this dress? It's so terrible. I'm terrible. Everything's terrible, right? It can go towards, okay, well, I'm removing the dress and I'm only going to wear what you like to wear, right? There's so many different experiences. And that tells us a lot about how are we able to tolerate difference without collapsing into they're bad or I'm bad. So what happens when you don't get validation? What collapses for you? What happens for you internally? Where do you go? This is important insight for where there may be an invitation to kind of help you solidify your sense of self so that validation, especially the meaningful, deep validation, can be a part of your life, can be a part of your relationship. It can be a way that you move in and out of being in contact with another person's mind. You can ask for it. It can feel good. But then if you don't get it, it doesn't collapse you. It doesn't deteriorate you. Or if it does, can you name it? Can you say, you know what? I feel really hurt that you don't like this dress. It really meant a lot that you would have liked it, but I can appreciate that you feel safe enough to tell me that your real opinion of it. And now we're just going to have to be with this difference. And I hurt. It doesn't feel good. But I think I'm still going to ultimately wear that dress or, whatever. When we can create some more understanding about what the role validation is or how important it is, etc., we can start to think more deeply about what happens when we're in a relationship where we're not getting it on a consistent basis in a way that feels really meaningful to us. What happens when we're consistently asking for some type of validation, some type of connection, some type of like affirmation, some type of reassurance. We are verbal people. We like to hear certain things. We love hearing I love you every day. We love getting in contact with intimacy with our partners every day, and we're not getting it. If we are able to then hold the fact that validation is important and a meaningful part of human relating, and we're not getting it, can we talk about it with our partner? Or maybe it's not the right partner for us, right? Or maybe it's not the right relationship, or maybe that person won't ever give us what we really want, and we're going to have to learn how to seek it from someone else. It goes back to why now and why this person. This is especially true for adults who are grappling with their relationship with their parents, because we can really crave that our parents validate the childhood that we had, that our parents can say, I messed up, I hurt you. Yeah, I can see how that was really painful, that you wanted that as a child and you didn't get it, and I am so sorry. We can imagine that hearing that would be such a healing balm. Oh my God, it would feel so affirming, right? It would feel like we're not crazy. It would feel like, look, somebody, the perpetrator of so much harm, can acknowledge their harm, and that can feel so reparative. But what happens when we can't get that? What happens when we keep seeking it out from our parents and we don't get it? There's something there about our inability to really grapple with the fact that there are certain people who are not going to be able to validate us the way that we want to be validated. And the fact that we keep seeking it out says something important to us. We need to take a pause and think about, why are we so desperately to get it from that person? What are we hoping that that's going to do? And if that person can't give it to us, how can we be kind of more honest with ourselves about the fact that there's this relentless hope, as Martha Stark talks about so aptly, so beautifully, this relentless hope that this person will finally get us what we want if we could just change, or if we could just ask in a different way. There's a way in which we're in denial of a reality that maybe they just can't ever give that to us. And when we can start to do this work of understanding the role that validation, cheap validation, meaningful validation has played for us, we can start to parse out how much of this is a real deficit in the relationship in a way that actually makes the relationship untenable, and where is this my stuff that I need to work on, right? Can I get validation from people who would be able to provide it? Where am I continually seeking validation from people who have shown that they can't give it to me as a way to continue to prove that I don't deserve validation? Right? There's so much complexity here, an opportunity for exploration if we slow down and really ask ourselves in these moments, what is this validation? What is the absence of this in my relationship? What is going on here for us? And remember, a lack of validation does not mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean the relationship is bad. It's just an opportunity for us to understand, to differentiate between reality and hope, and to practice internalizing our own validation. Right? To be able to give to ourselves what maybe sometimes some people cannot give to us. In psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic therapy, what that looks like is we, the therapist, are a consistent person. We're meeting at the same time every week, or twice a week, 3-4 times a week if you're in analysis, right? We're meeting someone on a consistent basis, and we're creating in that frame a structure in which our patient, our client, can begin to internalize us as a consistent, steady other, as someone that can be counted on and can be relied on to help them think about themselves and their validation and their internal reality and their psychic exploration. And as we do this, we create a way in which the client can start to internalize a steady, secure other. And through that, we begin to give ourselves the validation that we want from other people. Not because we can't want validation from others, but because we can want it, we can ask for it, and it doesn't destabilize us if we don't get it. The work here is to be able to give ourselves validation and to be able to ask for it in a way that we're going to be more likely to get it from the people that matter, the meaningful, deep validation, rather than the cheap, tell me that I'm right validation. And I think a lot of therapists are missing the point here. We have this fantasy that as therapists, we're providers of unconditional positive regard, and that we're here to just validate indefinitely and just kind of constantly be like, you're right and everything's good and yes. And I think people are starting to realize that that's a mask. That's not real. And so then they're seeking out therapists. They're like, are you going to give it to me straight? And again, it's because if we as therapists are people pleasers and are terrified of difference in the room, of being the bad object, of being kind of the one who invites discomfort in the room, if we're terrified of that and instead we lean too heavily on quote unquote validation, on telling them, you're right, this is normal, we're missing our clients. And then our clients are confused because they're wanting that on the one hand, but then as they're getting it, they're like, wait, this doesn't fit. This isn't really what I want. Validation is an important tool to the therapy, but it's something that has to be worked on and explored together. I see so many clips of therapists when a client says, I feel really anxious, and the therapist, their step is, well, that's really normal to feel anxious about that. And it's like, good job, that's good therapy. And it's like, what is going on there? We are missing out on the whole lot of like, what is anxious and what's going on for our clients. And if our clients is telling us that they're feeling something and it doesn't feel normal, it feels crazy, instead of saying, no, it is normal. What if we were like, well, why doesn't it feel normal? What is that discrepancy for you? What is going on here for you? That curiosity about the person's internal state is a form of validation. It's a communication of validation that goes beyond just saying, that's normal. Of course you feel that way. We start to find, I don't know, we fall into this trope of being this caring mother who's constantly saying, good job. But that's not real therapy. Us therapists can't ever be the mom that our patients didn't have. We can provide something different for sure, and the therapeutic encounter is different inherently in the therapeutic frame. But I'm worried that we're becoming a trope. We're falling into these stereotypes of what therapy is, and it's cheapening the experience for our clients. And this, I mentor psychoanalytic therapists and I mentor coaches, and I've been doing this for a long time. And I see it constantly. Coaches are so guilty of this, of using validation. This is normal. This is okay. This is normal as like their number one tool. And it really does not create psychic change. We need to have a foundation in the encounter where validation is a function of the relationship, but true validation is something that's going to have to be worked on between the two people, the therapist and the patient or the client, whatever word you want to put, right? The holder, space holder, the healing professional, whatever you want to name it, and the person receiving care. Validation is a tool for ego strength. It's a way that we're building our clients' inner sense of okayness. But if odds are you're probably already doing enough validation. And what is more useful more of the time is not to say, oh, that's normal. Oh, that's okay. Oh, that's right. But more so like, and why doesn't it feel normal? What do you make of that? What has that been like for you? What's it like to feel anxious about something that on the one hand, is normal, and on the other hand, does not feel normal? What does normal mean for you? Right? Building a curious stance, building a way of sitting in the room where you can think more deeply with our client is a way that we're helping them internalize a secure other. Yeah, like I think therapy and coaching has become commodified into this non-judgmental mirroring and this like, oh, yes, everything is good. When we know that part of building our client's internal validator is to go beyond just doing the external validation and more about getting curious around this tension, around what's going on when we get it and don't get it. What is happening for us when we are consistently seeking validation for people who can't give it to us? Yeah. We're so terrified of experiencing discomfort with our clients that I think we're doing too much normalizing and not enough curiosity. And then our clients are leaving feeling really incongruent, feeling really confused. They're getting the message from us that validation is this cheap form of validation. It's a constant affirmation, right? Without expanding on what real true validation is, which is expanding our capacity for frustration, ambiguity, and emotional complexity and another subjectivity. Yes? So validation can only be a useful tool if it's balanced with curiosity. So again, instead of that's normal, can we be like, what makes it not normal, right? Let's use it as like a stepping stone. It's all necessary, but we want to be thinking about it as a useful tool, not the therapy in and of itself. So As we wrap up today's conversation, I want to leave you with this. Validation is not inherently good or bad, but like most things in the emotional realm, right, it's complicated. It can be a balm when we're hurting. It can be a bridge in relationships, right? It can be a powerful recognition that says you're not alone. But when we begin to rely on it too heavily, when we treat it like it's as a demand rather than an opportunity, it actually keeps us from discovering who we are when no one is watching. Yeah. True healing doesn't come from being constantly affirmed. And so if your therapist is not constantly affirming you, that's an opportunity to explore that with them. But it is about developing an internal structure that can withstand misattunement, uncertainty, and even disagreement. This does not mean that we stop needing people. Let me be clear. It means that we stop outsourcing our entire sense of self to their reaction. And so for you, a really important part of your therapy may be grappling with the fact that you don't feel like your therapist validates you. And can we talk about it? Can we be in that tension together? You know, if you're chasing validation, you're not broken, but you're likely longing to be seen in ways that you haven't been seen before. And that longing is sacred. But also you may have to now do the work of starting to bring that gaze inward, to see yourself, to feel yourself, to validate your own experience, even when no one else does. Let's practice some discernment around what the cheap validation looks like, feels like, and what we're really seeking. And know that this is the work of a lifetime, but it is possible, right? And it is worth it. So thanks for listening. If this conversation stirred something up for you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share, please subscribe, do all the things. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much for being here. And if you think someone might want to hear this, feel free to share it with them. And if you want more, please go check out my episode on gaslighting. I think it really goes hand in hand with this episode. Let's talk about what gaslighting is and isn't, so that you can figure out what is real for you and for the relationship. Until next time.